They called me the help, so I became the owner. That steady, rhythmic drum in my chest hadn't started tonight. It was a beat that had been building for 10 years, a slow and patient rhythm of polite exclusion. My life with the Sterlings was a masterclass in the art of being erased. It wasn't outright cruelty. That would have been a cleaner wound. No, this was the slow poison of being perpetually overlooked, of your presence being treated like furniture. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each one delivered with a perfect smile. The most precise cut came 3 years ago at Liam's parents' 40th anniversary party. Their Ruby anniversary. I planned the entire thing. For 6 months, I was a whirlwind of invisible work, a phantom orchestrating their perfect memory. I negotiated with the vineyard, tasted dozens of canapes until my tongue was numb, and personally addressed 200 invitations in calligraphy until my fingers cramped. I handled every detail, building the event from the ground up, a flawless monument to their love. That night, the ballroom glittered. Genevieve, draped in diamonds that could fund a small nation, stood to give the toast. She raised her crystal flute, her voice resonating with practiced warmth. She thanked her darling husband, her wonderful children, her dear friends who had flown in from Gstad. She thanked the caterer by name. She even gave a special mention to the florist. She praised him for sourcing the perfect cream and blush roses, the very ones I had spent 3 weeks tracking down from a specialty grower. She was complimenting my work, but crediting it to a man who simply delivered the boxes. Her eyes, a cool and dismissive blue, scanned the room and slid right over me as if I were part of the scenery. Not a nod, not a whisper, nothing. I felt Liam's hand find mine under the table. He squeezed. "I know it was you," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "Thank you." He meant it as comfort, but in that moment it felt like the most profound betrayal. His words weren't a comfort, they were a confirmation. He was confirming that my value was to remain in the shadows, my contributions worthy only of a secret, not public pride. He was my passive husband, a man who saw the injustice, but would never risk his own comfort to correct it. He would not stand up for me. I didn't cry that night. The hurt was too deep for tears. It had crystallized into something harder, something useful. When we got home, I went to my small office, the one the Sterlings called my hobby room. I opened my laptop. Its familiar hum, a quiet comfort. I created a new heavily encrypted folder on my desktop. I named it Project Nightingale, a bird that sings its most powerful song in the dark. Inside, I opened a blank spreadsheet. In cell A1, I typed a date. In B1, I entered a number, my starting capital. This was not just financial planning, it was the blueprint for my own fortress. For the next 3 years, while the Sterlings posted photos from their second home in the Hamptons and bragged about their new yacht, I worked. I drove the same sedan until the paint started to fade, skipped vacations for late nights analyzing market trends, and funneled every spare dollar into Project Nightingale. They saw my frugality and mistook it for struggle. It's a shame Ilara doesn't have more ambition. I once heard Genevieve sigh to Liam. But I suppose not everyone is built for more. They were wrong. My ambition was simply quieter. A living thing growing in the dark, fed by spreadsheets and stock tickers. They built their legacy on the crumbling foundations of inherited pride and public performance. I was building my empire on silicon and steel. An empire built in the digital dark needs a real-world throne. A fortress of silicon and steel needs a physical address. The tipping point, the moment my quiet war went live, happened last summer back at the one place the Sterlings considered their private sanctuary, Serenity Peak Lodge. We were in one of an older, less renovated suites, the kind they assigned to us. The walls were paper thin. I was reading over some quarterly reports when I heard Genevieve's voice from the adjoining room, muffled but unmistakable. She was on the phone, her tone light and dismissive. "Oh, Ilara." "She's a sweet girl, really," Genevieve said, and I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "But she'll never be one of us. You can just see it in her posture. There's no legacy there." Legacy. The word didn't sting. Not this time. For 10 years, that word had been a judgment, a brand on my skin marking me as other. But hearing it then through that cheap wall, it sounded different. It wasn't an insult. It was a diagnosis of their weakness. They leaned on a legacy they hadn't built, a name they had only inherited. And in that moment, I realized what I had to do. I had to buy theirs. The hurt was gone, replaced by a chilling, absolute clarity. I didn't cry. I didn't even clench my fists. I stood up, walked out onto the small balcony, and pulled out my phone. The cold mountain air a shock to my system. I scrolled to a number I hadn't called in years. Julian, I said when he answered my voice, steady and low. It's Alara Vance. I'm Liquid. I'm looking for an anchor asset, something with a story. Hospitality sector. There was a pause, then a low chuckle on the other end. Funny you should call Vance. There's an off-market deal I just heard about through the grapevine. Very quiet. Owners are old, tired, and motivated. What is it? I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Serenity Peak Lodge. The world seemed to go silent around me. It felt like destiny, a perfect circle closing. Of course it was. It had to be. There's a catch, though, Julian continued, his voice dropping. The place has history, Alara. The old patriarch who built it, Silas, was a strange one. He left something locked away in the master suite's main safe. Told his kids the next true owner would know what to do with it. No one knows what it is. Could be priceless, could be a mess. It's a risk. A new mystery. A secret locked in the heart of their sacred ground. The risk didn't deter me, it galvanized me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about claiming a story. Buy it. I said the words, tasting like freedom. Use the Vance Legacy Holdings Fund. Pay what they're asking. I want it done by the end of the quarter. There was a sharp intake of breath on Julian's end. Alara, that's your entire war chest. I know, I said. It's a tipping point. I ended the call and stood there watching the last rays of sun disappear behind the mountains. A few clicks on my phone, a secure login, and I authorized the transfer, watching the balance of Project Nightingale drain to almost zero. It was an act of total commitment, a burning of my own ships. As the confirmation email arrived hours later, a single line glowed on my screen: ownership transferred. I didn't just own a property, I owned the stage for their final act. 1 year later, the stage was set. The props were in place, and the actors, bless their oblivious hearts, had no idea the script had been rewritten. Arriving at Serenity Peak Lodge with Liam for the annual family vacation felt like walking through a memory, only this time, I wasn't a guest. I was a ghost in my own machine, haunting the halls they thought they still ruled. The performance began the moment we stepped into the lobby. Walking through it, I was invisible, just as I'd always been. Liam's sister Clara sighed dramatically at the check-in counter. They used to know our names here, she lamented to her husband. Now it's all so corporate. I suppressed a smile. I had implemented a strict policy against staff accepting personal gifts to prevent the exact kind of favoritism she missed. It was one of my first ethical upgrades. The entitlement was a constant suffocating hum. At the welcome reception by the lake, Liam's brother Marcus saw me standing near the bar and snapped his fingers in my direction. He didn't even use my name. Hey, get me another old-fashioned, will you? The service here has become glacial. I wanted to tell him the service was slower because I doubled the staff's paid break times and outlawed mandatory double shifts. They were human beings, not Sterling family property, but I just gave him a tight, polite smile and fetched his drink. Every complaint was a secret compliment to the changes I'd made. The water pressure was a little low. That was the new lake-friendly filtration system kicking in. The menu was different. Yes, I had replaced the international food conglomerate with 3 local farm-to-table vendors. I was a ghost, observing the beautiful, dramatic irony of it all. They were critiquing my quiet revolution, and they didn't even know it. Later that evening, I excused myself, telling Liam I needed to make a work call. My secret meeting was not in some grand office, but in the quiet, dusty library at the back of the lodge, a room no one had used in years. Ethan, the resort manager I'd kept on, was waiting. He was a good man, sharp and professional, and he stood as I entered. "Ma'am," he said, the simple respect in his voice a stark contrast to the casual disdain of my family. He slid 2 items across the heavy oak table. The first was the antique brass key. It was heavier than it looked, cool and solid in my palm. "The key from Mr. Silas's estate," Ethan said. "His lawyer told me the old man left a note with it. It just said, 'For the one who understands what it's worth, not just what it costs.'" I closed my fingers around it, a tangible piece of a history I was about to inherit. Then he pushed forward the second item, a plain manila folder. His expression turned grim. And this is the other thing you asked for, he said quietly. The personnel reviews vendor contracts and lease summaries from the last 15 years. The folder seemed to hum with a quiet, dangerous energy. It was a history of a different kind. My history now. I took them both, the key and the folder, the past and the future. Ethan cleared his throat. The family's private dinner is tomorrow night. Are you ready for the announcement? I looked down at the two objects in my hands. One represented a hidden legacy, the other cold, hard facts. They thought they were here for another week of free drinks and casual cruelty. They had no idea they were attending a reckoning. They wanted a family dinner, I said, my voice even and calm. Let's give them a night to remember. The private dining hall was a masterpiece of sterling excess, a perfect stage for a tragedy. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables groaning with floral arrangements and polished silver. The air was thick with the scent of expensive wine and even more expensive perfume. After the main course, Genevieve Sterling, matriarch of this crumbling dynasty, rose to her feet, glass in hand. A toast, she announced, her voice carrying through the room. Two families like ours, the ones who are the bedrock of fine institutions like this one. We aren't just guests, she said, making eye contact with the other legacy families in the room. We are the legacy. A smattering of polite, self-congratulatory applause followed. It was my cue. I gave a subtle nod to Ethan, who was standing discreetly by the door. He moved to the front of the room and gently tapped his water glass with a spoon. The sound cut through the murmuring. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention for just a moment, he began, his voice calm and professional. As you know, Serenity Peak Lodge is under new ownership. Tonight, we are honored to finally introduce the principal of Vance Legacy Holdings and the new proprietor of this establishment, Ms. Ilara Vance. The name dropped into the room like a stone into a silent pond. What followed was a cinematic climax of stunned disbelief. Clara, Liam's sister, literally dropped her dessert fork, which clattered onto her plate with a sharp crack. Across the table, her husband Marcus, who had been mid-sip, choked on his vintage Bordeaux. I saw a dozen jaws go slack, eyes wide with incomprehension. But I only watched one person, Liam. His face was a slow-motion collage of confusion, morphing into betrayal, then into a dawning, sickening horror as he stared at me, truly seeing me for the very first time. I didn't rush. I pushed back my chair, stood, and walked to the podium Ethan had vacated. My footsteps were the only sound in the tomb-like silence. I placed the manila folder on the lectern and looked directly at Genevieve, whose smile was frozen on her face. Genevieve spoke of legacy. I said, my voice even and clear, amplified slightly by the microphone. I agree. It's important. I opened the folder, which is why, as my first official act, all existing legacy contracts are under immediate review for breach of conduct. I slid the top page out an eviction notice for Marcus, who had been illegally subletting his family cabin for years at a massive profit. I didn't have to read it. The words "notice to vacate" were clear enough from across the room. All special privileges, all complimentary services, all family discounts are terminated. Effective immediately. From now on, the Sterlings will pay the same rate as everyone else. Then came the public reckoning. Furthermore, I continued my gaze sweeping the room before landing back on my mother-in-law. I am pleased to announce the formation of a new scholarship program. A flicker of interest in Genevieve's eyes. It will be called the Cecilia Vance Educational Fund in honor of my mother. She cleaned motel rooms for 16 years to give me a life she never had. She taught me that true legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you build with integrity. Genevieve's face fell, the mask of polite society cracking into genuine shock. I turned my full attention to my husband. He looked like a stranger, lost and pale. You wanted to leave a review for the new management, Liam, I asked, my voice dangerously soft. I'm all ears. I placed the folder on the podium and walked out of the silent room, not looking back. I didn't need to. I could feel the entire foundation of their world cracking behind me. The cracks in their foundation spread faster than they could imagine. The aftermath of the dinner was not about apologies, it was about consequences. The rest of the family descended into a quiet, panicked chaos, a flurry of whispered phone calls and accusatory glances. But the most important conversation happened in the silence of our suite. Liam was waiting for me, standing by the window overlooking the dark, placid lake. He wasn't angry. He just looked hollowed out. He watched me for a long moment before he spoke, and when he did, his voice was that of a stranger. Who are you? It wasn't the question I had expected. Not, why did you do this? Or how could you just, who are you? The question itself was the answer he had never known. I looked at him, the man I had loved, and felt a profound, aching sadness, but no anger. The fire had burned out long ago. I'm the woman you never bothered to look at. I said, my voice as quiet as his. There was nothing else to say. We both knew it was over. The silence that filled the room was the true end of our marriage, more definitive than any slammed door or shouted words. Later that night, when the resort was finally still, I took the antique brass key and made my way to the master suite, the grand set of rooms on the top floor that had belonged to the resort's founder, Silas. The air inside was cool and smelled of old books and cedar. It felt like a time capsule. I walked over to the large, ornate wall safe, the one everyone knew about, and tried the key. It didn't fit. Of course it didn't. That would have been too simple. My eyes scanned the room, searching for what I wasn't sure. Then I saw it. Beneath a heavy Persian rug, one of the old wooden floorboards was slightly discolored with a small, almost invisible indentation. I knelt, my heart pounding, and pried it up with my fingernails. There, nestled in the dark space below, was the rusted cover of a hidden floor safe. The brass key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. Inside, there were no gold bars, no stacks of cash. There was only a thick, leather-bound ledger and a single sealed envelope addressed to the next owner. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the book. It wasn't a financial account, it was a moral ledger. Each page detailed a small, cruel injustice committed by the Sterlings over the decades. Entry, June 1998. Young housekeeper fired by Mrs. Sterling for accidentally breaking a vase. My note paid her 6 months severance and tuition for nursing school. SV. Another entry, August 2005. The Sterlings bankrupted a local linen supplier by refusing to pay for an order they claimed was subpar. My note covered the supplier's losses anonymously. SV, page after page, a secret history of their shame and his quiet decency. Finally, I opened the letter. The handwriting was strong, the ink faded but clear. It told the story of Silas, a man who had also come from nothing, who had been despised by the same legacy families. He wrote of his fight to build this place his monument. The letter ended with a passage I knew I would never forget. They value money, but they fear shame. This book is your insurance, but I hope you never have to use it. Use your power to build, not to destroy. Their legacy is ash. Make yours from the fire. I closed the ledger. He was right. The power wasn't in threatening to expose them. The true power was the knowledge that I didn't have to. The insurance wasn't the book. It was the quiet certainty that I was not the first to stand against them, and I would not be the last to build something better on their ruins. In the months that followed, I focused on building from the fire. 6 months after that fateful dinner, Serenity Peak Lodge was thriving. The air itself felt different, lighter. Laughter echoed from the newly renovated patios, and the staff, now paid a fair living wage with benefits, walked with a newfound sense of pride. The resort was no longer a stuffy museum of inherited wealth. It was alive with a vibrant, earned energy. Last week, I received a letter. It was a picture of a smiling young woman standing in front of a university, and the note was from the first recipient of the Cecilia Vance Educational Fund, the daughter of one of our head housekeepers. She'd been accepted into her dream engineering program. That letter meant more to me than any financial statement. It was proof of a new legacy taking root. I once thought this was about revenge, about burning down the Sterling's world as they had tried to shrink mine. But looking at that letter, I understood Silas's final words. This was never about destruction. It was about reclamation. My goal wasn't to shatter their name, but to build my own so solidly that theirs simply became irrelevant. I didn't need their world to be ash. I just needed my own to be fire. Liam and I finalized our separation quietly, without animosity. We were simply two people who no longer fit into the same story. This evening, I found myself sitting alone at the head of the grand table in the empty private dining hall. The same table where I had been a ghost. The silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. It was the sound of ownership. Spread before me wasn't a feast, but architectural plans, sketched onto the back of a napkin, a new wellness wing, an artist's retreat. My work wasn't finished. It was just beginning. They tell you to fight for a seat at the table. I say, why? Why fight for a seat when you can build your own table? Better yet, design the whole damn room. True power isn't a name you inherit or a chair you're granted. It's the quiet, undeniable strength you discover when you finally have the courage to write your own name at the top of the page. That is an empire no one can ever take away from you.